Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Abby and you are watching part 1 of the Great Discworld Project 2021. If you missed my introductory video on this series, I will be reading all 41 of the Discworld novels and making individual videos on each one with my thoughts, feelings and opinions. I did mention in my introductory video that I would be filming this video immediately afterwards, so I'd look exactly the same. I do not. It is the next day. I filmed this video yesterday, didn't like it, filming it again. So that's why I've lied to you in the previous video. I do apologise. But this being part 1 of the Discworld series means, of course, that I am talking about The Colour of Magic, the first Discworld novel, first published in 1983. That is a whole 13 years before I was published. And the 41 books of the series, including this one, ran until, just after Terry Pratchett died, unfortunately. But I'm not here to talk about Terry Pratchett's death. We can talk about that when we read The Shepherd's Crown. But for now, I imagine that most people who want to hear somebody's opinions on The Colour of Magic, on the Discworld novels, are people who are familiar with the Discworld novels. So if you are fully aware of what goes on in this book, I will leave a timestamp in the description below just to let you skip the summary. For everyone else, people who haven't read it for a while and just want to be caught up, people who haven't read it before, because this summary is going to just be a pretty bare bones thing of this happens, then this happens, then this happens. And I think a lot of the enjoyment of Terry Pratchett's writing is the delivery of those things rather than those things, if you see what I mean. Anyway, here's the summary now. If you want to skip it, skip it. If you don't. Here we go. The Colour of Magic introduces us to the Discworld, a world literally shaped like a disc. This Discworld, with all its continents and mountains and all that good stuff, balanced atop the backs of 4 massive elephants, who they themselves are on the top of the back of an even more massive space turtle called the Greater Chewin. That's the Discworld, baby! Also, the elephants have names, but I can't remember them, so we're just moving on. The story proper starts in the city of Ankh-Morpork, which, whilst it is sort of an every city, you know, like an everyman character, it's an every city, I do like to think of it as a London allegory, because Ankh-Morpork is horrible and smelly and the water is undrinkable and the people are nasty, and in London it's horrible and smelly and the water can't be drunk and the people are nasty. So I think of it as fantasy London. Up to you, it can be fantasy whatever city you hate the most. Here in this horrible city we meet Rincewind, which is difficult to say, a failed wizard and cynic who is hired by Two-Flower, a pretty obvious stereotype of a Japanese tourist who is from a distant and extremely wealthy land. He has a lot of wealth. Comparatively to those back home, it's not that much wealth. He doesn't think he has lots of money, but by comparison, he's a bajillionaire, basically, which puts a big old target on his back for every horrible thief and cutthroat in the city to come and try and steal his stuff, because he's loaded. Two-Flower has an unfailingly positive attitude about everything due to the fact that he is on holiday and nothing really bad can happen to you when you're on holiday. He also has a camera that is a box a tiny demon painter lives in, who paints the images that you point the camera at. And he also has his luggage, a magical sentient suitcase that will follow its master everywhere upon its dozens of feet, and it will protect itself and the master at all costs. Two-Flower's day job, when he isn't being a tourist, is an insurance salesman. When he is kidnapped because people want to steal his vast wealth and taken to the Broken Drum, a filthy little tavern, Two-Flower sells the landlord insurance against fire damage. The landlord, not being all that smart, decides to set fire to his tavern to claim the insurance money. He also, in the process, sets all of Ankh-Morpork ablaze, which is point 2 in my Ankh-Morpork is London theory. The hapless pair attempt to travel to the city of Quirm for some reason, and end up being split up by a troll on the road. Two Flower ends up in the temple of Bel Shamharoth, a being that is the opposite of both good and evil. Good and evil are two sides of the same coin. Bel Shamharoth is a different, very scary coin. Rincewind is being watched by Death himself and is simultaneously almost stung to death by a bunch of insects, ripped apart by wolves, and fall to his death from a tree. In some order like that, and Death is waiting to claim him. However, Rincewind is rescued by a dryad, which is a tree spirit. However, it becomes abundantly clear that he has not been rescued, he has been kidnapped and is taken through the tree that has a kind of TARDIS set up, bigger on the inside, big palatial palace on the inside, little skinny tree on the outside. It's the Discworld. It's magic. It doesn't matter. We don't need to explain it. Moving on. He escapes the Dryads through a magical portal that they are using to show Two Flower bimbling around the temple of Bel Shamharoth, and Rincewind dives through it, and he is reunited with Two Flower there. They also meet Hrun the Barbarian, who is a hero for hire, who is busy trying to steal everything in the temple that isn't nailed down. The newly formed trio almost die in the temple when they accidentally summon Bel Shamharoth himself, but Rincewind manages to blind the creature accidentally using Two Flower's photo box or camera. Hrun then agrees to join them as they escape the temple and protect these two useless people in exchange for lots of photographs of himself standing in heroic poses. This goes well for all of about half a page before they accidentally find themselves in a very magic-heavy area called the Wormburg. They are almost immediately set upon by dragons and their riders. Two Flower and Hrun are captured, but Rincewind just about escapes. However, Hrun's magical and ego-driven sword Kring insists that the wizard go and save his friends. But it is Two Flower who saves them all, for the magic of the Wormburg is so powerful that the dragon riders summon their dragons by imagining them into existence, which is facilitated by the magic of the Wormburg, this giant upside-down mountain. Two Flower, having an abundance of imagination, accidentally summons a bigger, better, more powerful dragon than any of the dragon riders have, and they escape this way, they being Rincewind, Hrun, and Two Flower. However, they fly too high and Two Flower passes out from the lack of oxygen, making his imagination-driven dragon disappear. Now, Hrun, who is jacked and stupid, which makes him the perfect husband, is saved by the worm's female leader, but she leaves the decidedly unjacked Two Flower and Rincewind to fall to their deaths. Rincewind manages to briefly summon a passenger jet from the real world using the incredible magic of the Wormburg before he and Two Flower fall into the sea. Ocean currents carry our two protagonists and the luggage to the edge of the disc where they feel they will fall off the edge, but instead they are caught by the circumference, a net set up along the edge of the disc to catch whatever tries to float off the edge. This is built by the Krullians. News of Rincewind and Two Flower being caught travels to the Krullian capital, and news that they must be sent to the capital is sent back. The people of Krull are attempting to find out the sex of the great Achuin, as whether the giant space turtle will do some bonking or be bonked at some point will have dramatically different outcomes for the people of the disc, if you follow. And for that matter, it will have a dramatically different effect for the elephants as well. The Krullians are going to sacrifice Two Flower and Rincewind to fate in hopes that fate will smile upon their voyage. However, instead, Rincewind and Two Flower escape again. Two Flower makes it into the spacecraft set to go automatically and flies out to find out what sex the Greater Chewin is, I guess. Rincewind does not make it in time, neither does the luggage, and he and the luggage together plummet off the edge of the disc. Okay, so that's the plot. Now, what I am about to say needs to be qualified, so I shall qualify it. I love a lot of Terry Pratchett's books. I love a lot of his characters, and I enjoy a lot of these books very, very much. That being said, Colour of Magic isn't very good. But I mean that The Colour of Magic is not very good for a Discworld novel. And it's also not very good for a novel. So I'm going to just kind of go through. I wrote out what the summary was because otherwise I'd have gotten lost. But I've just got a few bullet points of things that I want to talk about. So the rest of this is going to be a little bit more loose and casual. So comparing The Colour of Magic with later books, and especially Hogfather, which I have in this fancy edition because I bought it last Christmas. Death is wrong in The Colour of Magic. He's not right yet. For example, Death in this book is constantly annoyed that Rincewind keeps escaping death, and annoyed that he hasn't been able to claim Rincewind's soul. He then claims the souls of other insects and animals around him. For example, here, just after Rincewind has been saved by the tree dryad, Death glanced at the clouds of mayflies that were dancing their joyful zigzags near his skull. He snapped his fingers. The insects fell out of the air, but somehow it wasn't quite the same. Which, this man pretends to be the Hogfather so that the sun will rise, so that the people don't all die on the disc. Spoilers for Hogfather, I guess? But this death here, this wonderful death, is not this death. Whoa. It's not this death. And I think a lot of what I don't like about The Colour of Magic is knowing what the Discworld becomes later on. And, you know, this 1983, he had a long time to figure out the Discworld and figure out the characters and get everything right later on. By most accounts, and by most accounts I mean my mum's opinion and my friend who sent me on this quest opinion, the series pretty much starts proper and becomes the Discworld in Mort, which is only the 4th book along. Like, there are plenty of authors who have had tens of books published and they're still not any good. So, you know, only being 4 books in, that's not bad going, Terry. And on that as well, of characters are not quite being right, because obviously a lot of these characters are recurring. We do meet them again in later stories in different circumstances, Death especially, but we do spend a lot more time with Rincewind going forward. But the biggest character who isn't right yet in The Colour of Magic is the narrator. One thing I love about Pratchett's books above anything else is that the narrative voice is so clearly defined and the character of the narrator is clearly defined. Now, it is not meant to be, as far as I can tell, as far as I know, the narrator is not meant to be a particular character. You know, it's not one of the gods, it's not one of the fates, it's none of these people like reflecting on what's happened. It's just an omniscient third-person narrator. But there's so much character in everything the narrator says in later books. And in The Colour of Magic, it's just a bit lacking. It's still definitely there. You know, I can see the first tentative baby steps of the narrative voice of the narrator being defined. You know, there is a personality to the words, but a lot of the time the storytelling is quite flat, which it just isn't in later books. But in terms of a book overall, both of those criticisms don't really apply. You know, if we're looking at it just as an individual book on its own, not comparing it to the next books that came out, just talking about a book on its own, the way Death is as a character in this isn't bad. It's just not as good or as interesting as Death becomes later on. Having your Death character be spiteful and vindictive and somebody who just really wants to kill people and really enjoys killing people is completely valid, and an interpretation of Death that exists in a lot of interpretations of him as the Reaper. It's just way more interesting when he's not like that. And also the narrative voice, it's fine. It's fine. If I was reading this and had no knowledge of Terry Pratchett outside of the novel, the narrative voice is fine. It is interesting, and I can see the fledgling feeling of the narrator going forward. Now, what maybe... Oh no, I've just got eyeliner on the cover. Oh, this is what happens when you're a goth and you read books. You get eyeliner everywhere. So those criticisms don't really work in terms of... You know, those don't make the book bad. It just make it retroactively not as good as the next books. What makes it bad as a book on its own, though? First of all, there's no plot. Now you might be sitting there going, Abby, you spent however many minutes doing a plot summary. There's definitely a plot. You talked about all these things that happened. There's a plot. What's wrong with you? This book is a series of things rather than a plot. Stuff happens. And something I missed out of the summary because I wanted to talk about it now is that everything that happens to Rincewind and Twoflower is all a sort of big cosmic gambling card game between the gods and the fates. And when that troll appears in the road and separates them, and Twoflower ends up going to the temple of Bel-Shamharoth, Offler, the crocodile god, summons that troll in the way to cause them problems. These characters don't have a goal that they are working towards, really. Twoflower came to Ankh-Morpork because he wanted to go on a tourist trip around Ankh-Morpork, and every time something happens to them that means that they're in a different place now, Twoflower is thrilled because he's a tourist and he wants to go places and see things and take photos of them so that he can take those photos back and show them to his family, which is what tourists want, obviously. And Rincewind panics about it. And when we first meet the characters, Twoflower is almost childishly naive and optimistic, and Rincewind is cynical and panicky. And at the end of the book, Twoflower is almost childishly naive and optimistic, and Rincewind is cynical and panicky. There's no arc of any description with either of them, and they don't go places because they choose to go places. Things happen to them because the gods have decided that they want to screw with them. And that's definitely interesting as a narrative structure, having these people basically just being batted around by a giant cosmic cat and they're a little mouse, you know? But generally, if you know anything about creative writing or filmmaking or anything that involves storytelling, you will be aware of kind of classic story structure, and that at certain percentages of the way through the plot, you want certain things to happen. You know, you may have heard about the hero's journey as a story arc. It's an archetypal monomyth. Loads of things fit into the hero's journey. There's that whole theory that there are only like 7 stories and everything else is just kind of set dressing on top of them. And that there's no such thing as original thought. And I'm not here to discuss any of that. I'm here to discuss the colour of magic. But stepping outside of a traditional narrative structure isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can be very interesting, but in The Colour of Magic, it's just kind of boring. Because stuff just happens to them and there's no kind of feeling of progression. You know, like looking at the book, when I was nearly at the end, and I knew I was nearly at the end because it's a book, so you can see how near you are to the end, I was sitting there going, but it's not the end, it's just another thing that's happening to them. And yeah, I think it could be interesting to have characters who are completely out of control of, you know, they have no control over what's happening to them, where they're going, why it's happening, why they're doing what they're doing. I think that's an interesting concept. I just don't think it's very well expressed in this book. And interestingly, it is one of very few of the Discworld novels that has sections. So, most of the Discworld novels are just kind of one continuous narrative. So, for example, let's just flick to, so just this page on Hogfather. You can see that there's just kind of a dot which just splits off sections. It's not sort of chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. We have a chapter structure in the young adult novels, so that's the Tiffany Aching and Maurice and his educated rodents, not magical mice, which I said yesterday. And this does have chapters, sort of. It has The Colour of Magic prologue, then The Colour of Magic. You can see the prologue is quite short. And then we go into The Sending of 8, which is where all the stuff with Belth Shammaroth happens. We've got the prologue and then the main section, and then into The Lure of the Worm, where they go to Wormburg, and then Close to the Edge, where they fall off the edge of the world. When I was doing research for this video, I did see a couple of people talking about how The Colour of Magic is more like a collection of a few short stories that are linear, happen to the same characters, and happen immediately after each other. Which, yeah, sure, and it's there in the structure, so I guess I could be told to shove off with this particular critique of there's no plot. But still, the characters don't have any agency. They don't want to achieve anything. They don't want to go anywhere. And yes, the reluctant hero can work very well. You know, look at The Mandalorian, for example. Jin doesn't want to be the hero. He doesn't want to have a plot. He wants to just go back to his job, but keeps being thrust into the belly of the beast and has kind of no control over that. But even then, he's trying to get Grogu home. He doesn't want to be a glorious space hero. He just wants to get his adoptive son somewhere safe. And that's great. Whereas here, Rincewind couldn't give a damn about what happens to Two Flower or Two Flower's luggage. He just wants to go home and have a sleep. It's just not very interesting. Also, it doesn't really have an ending. It has a beginning where it spends a long time explaining the physics of the Discworld, which, let me just briefly talk about that for a second. I am quite happy to suspend my disbelief, willing suspension of disbelief. When you're watching the Muppets, you know that Kermit is a puppet with someone's hand in, but you watch The Muppets Christmas Carol and you accept that Kermit is playing Bob Cratchit, right? You suspend your disbelief, and you're quite happy to believe that that's a character and that Michael Caine is one of the few people that exist in this Muppet universe, right? When you tell me that your fantasy book is set on a Discworld atop 4 elephants atop the Greater Chewin, who is slowly swimming through space and is a turtle, I'm like, sure. It's a fantasy book. You've established that the Discworld is particularly weird because it's at the very edge of reality, so all of reality kind of piles up and makes weird things happen, and I am completely fine with that. But then this book spends a long time explaining how the sun works and how the moon works and how the tides work and how the Discworld has really long years because of this, so it's got 8 seasons per year and has like double winter, and in the second winter is when they have Hogswatch. Ooh. Have Hogswatch their Christmas once every other winter because it's the long year. And babe, I don't care. That bit really lost me, and this is entirely like a personal thing, you know, like I can bandy around words about narrative structure and, oh, I did a creative writing degree, look at me, but that bit is entirely like personal opinion. I just don't care. You know, I don't need anyone to bend over backwards to try and explain to me how the Discworld could possibly exist, because obviously if the world was a disc, that would be stupid and nothing would work. Flat earthers, do not come for me. You're brainwashed. Go away. Anyway, Discworld clearly wouldn't make any sense, wouldn't work at all physically. So just leave it at that. You know, just leave it. It happens because magic. Shut up. You know, but maybe in the 80s people needed that explained for them. Or wanted that explained for them. And maybe you. Please do tell me, by the way. And I will ask again this at the end of the video, but please do tell me if you agree, if you disagree with any of the things that I've brought up. I would be really excited to get to talk to some people about what they thought about this book. And that's why I'm doing this whole series, is because I want to talk to people about stuff, because we're still in a pandemic, and I am lonely, and I am sad. Anyway, fiction, happy, Colour of Magic, yay! So it just sort of ends, and this is partly due to the fact that The Light Fantastic, the next novel, is a direct sequel of The Colour of Magic. So later on in the series, for example, if you read Weird Sisters, then Witches Abroad, which are like books 1 and 2 in the Witches series within Discworld, Witches Abroad is not a direct sequel to Weird Sisters. These characters have been doing other stuff in the meantime. You know, it doesn't pick up exactly where Weird Sisters left off. And I am not sure. I don't think any other books do this in the series where there's like just a direct continuation. But basically The Colour of Magic and The Light Fantastic, because I'm halfway through The Light Fantastic, they just go straight into each other. So really they feel like one big book, and maybe I'll feel differently about the kind of lack of structure in The Colour of Magic by the time I finish The Light Fantastic, because maybe, you know, maybe it should have been just one big book, and maybe I should have talked about these at the same time, but I haven't, so. So it's very, very unusual, at least in modern publishing, to have a first book in a series like this. Insofar as any new series, the first book kind of has to be able to stand on its own, because you have no idea if the publisher will want to issue a sequel. You have no idea how well that book's going to go. You can't have a book where it just sort of ends halfway when your main character has just fallen off the side of the earth and you've no idea and it's just got no ending, and you can't do that now. And obviously, I am thrilled that you could in the 80s, and I am thrilled, or whether or not this was something that you could just get away with in the 80s, or if this was just Terry Pratchett managed to do well, I don't know. I haven't looked into it because it doesn't really matter. But I don't know if the publisher, not Corgi, it was someone before it was Corgi. Well, let's just find out, shall we? Colin Smythe, Smythe. I don't know if they bought more than one book, because you do hear about people getting like a 2-book deal or a 3-book deal, and they will buy the first book that you're pitching and 2 sequels or something. But yeah, it's just really odd to read a book that so clearly doesn't have an ending. Because pretty much any other book in the series, including, like, I've just finished reading, if you look in the other book, just finished reading the Tiffany Aching series, you could read any of them. You know, like, you could start with The Shepherd's Crown if you wanted to. I wouldn't advise it. I think you should start with The We Free Men and work your way through. But you can just read one of them. You could just read I Shall Wear Midnight. And that's the middle. But it's its own narrative in a bubble, nice narrative, and the character work is strong enough in all of them that you can get away with that, which you can't really get away with, you know. You couldn't read The Light Fantastic just on its own. You'd have to read The Colour of Magic first, and I don't like that, given that the rest of Discworld is not like that. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Overall, let's wrap this waffle up, because I have been talking for a long time. I just made a boop noise. 2 people subscribed to my channel in this time that I've been filming this video. Thank you, lovely to have you. So let's wrap all this up. It's fine. You know, it's a 2.5 out of 5 stars kind of deal. I'm not going to be giving star ratings to all of these books, because I really don't think that it's... I don't find, like, number ratings or star ratings of films or books or anything to be particularly helpful, because it's an arbitrary number, and also, if you want to know what I think about it, you should listen to all the stuff I said, instead of just, you know, how many stars does it get in your opinion, like, pfft. But, you know, 2.5 out of 5, or 5 out of 10, you know, very middle of the road, completely fine, but it gets a lot better from here. Or maybe it gets a lot better from About Equal Rights, I don't know. I am halfway through Light Fantastic, and I've got to say, I think a lot of these opinions are going to carry over into Light Fantastic, so that might be a much shorter video where I'm just like, look at my Colour of Magic review, and pretend I said the Light Fantastic. But I don't know, because I'm only halfway through. I'm not there yet. I don't want to paint an opinion before I've finished the thing, because that's just not cool. But yeah, so this book is fine. I think if I were to have anyone ask me, oh, I really want to read the Discworld novels, where should I start? I don't think I'd suggest that they start with The Colour of Magic. I think I'd gauge who they are as a person and then send them to a specific series. Someone who wants to start Terry Pratchett's work, they've come off the back of Good Omens, would I suggest they start with The Colour of Magic? I probably wouldn't. I'd probably tell them to have a look at the suggested reading orders on the Terry Pratchett website. You know, just choose a series. What do you think excites you the most? Do you like police dramas the most? Do you like weird gothic shit? Let's read the Death series. How do you feel about witchcraft? You know, push them down one of those paths and then let them kind of branch out from there. But what I'm doing is just a chronological read through of all the books, so that's what I'm going to continue to do. So that's the end of the video. That's a very long video. I'm very sorry, but I did warn you, I do have opinions and I did want to say them. So thank you so much for watching if you've made it all the way to the end of the video. If you haven't already and you would like to be notified when the Light Fantastic review comes out, please do subscribe to the channel. If you disagree, agree, have different opinions, have things that I haven't even mentioned about the colour of magic that you want to talk about, please do leave it in a comment down below. I would love to talk to you about stuff. I love hearing people's opinions about books. As I said in my last video, I miss my degree like crazy, and pandemic, I miss people like crazy. So please, I would love if you have those opinions, if you have the time, if you want to chat with me about it, I would absolutely love to do that with you. So thank you so much for watching, and I will hopefully see you in the next video. Bye bye.